Welcome back to my studio. My name's Rick Manners. Anyone who's watched any of my previous videos know that I have a huge passion for designing and building die-cast cars. So I'm going to use this video today to walk through my latest build. And my latest build right now has been based on the new model group that I joined called Group 25 in Toronto. And in September, they have a contest coming up called the Roaring Twenties. So that, and I'll explain that in a minute, but that has been my inspiration to build my latest design, which is called the Auburghini Land Speed. And let me explain. I started by looking at cars from the 20s and early 30s, and I really loved the design that they put into their automobiles. Back then, they had a great understanding about aerodynamics, and by covering fenders, by making cars look more aerodynamic, by having sort of, especially with this one with the boat tail on the back end. Um, Using that design to make the car more aerodynamic, and this is going to be based on this my group 25. So the competition that's coming up, they want to have you have to build a car based on either something from the 1920s era or something from the 2000s era. So I'm going to take an Auburn Speedster. That's going to be my car based from the 20s. And I want to combine the two, not just have one from either era. And I want to take something from a Lamborghini, a 12-cylinder Lamborghini, and I'm going to combine the two. So let's start. And what I did first was I took the Auburn apart and disassembled all the pieces to look at the chassis and the fenders and the wheel coverings. And I looked, and I loved the rear end of this car. So I thought, let's start by taking off the rear fenders. So I chopped the rear fenders off and the wheel wells, and I'm going to use that design and turn the car backwards. So I started by filling in all the front grille, and I filled in the holes in the fenders where the exhaust headers would have gone through, and the headlights, and filled in the doors as well. Now, the moment I put this old airplane canopy onto the car, there was my design. I want to have some sort of a tail stabilizer to it. So I started by actually looking at filling in those rear fenders. So this is now going to be the tail of the car, original car is now going to be the nose of my land speed car. So I took some acid-free mat board, filled in the openings, took body filler, auto body filler, and started to fill in the all around the body itself. And if you look down inside, I actually enclosed part of where the cockpit is going to be as well. I didn't want this great big opening. The driver would have to climb over the body to get into the cockpit. I then turned my attention to the chassis. Now the rear of the chassis is now going to be the front. It's going to be backwards. So I was able to save part of the original design of the chassis of the front end, which is now going to be the rear. I then looked at continuing on with the body filler itself. And you can see here, I've got this large rear stabilizer wing when the canopy was on there, and it just didn't seem to fit. It looked more like a Batmobile, an old style Batmobile than anything. And I even kept the original engine cover on there as well. That was my original concept. Moving back to the chassis, once I'm still working on the body filler, I start to assemble the front end of the chassis, taking different components so that I can get it to fit in. And at this stage, I've now decided I'm going to make it a three-wheeled car. So it's only going to have one wheel in the front, which will be the steering wheel. And then here you can see the rear end of the car. I've actually added in for the rear wheels for the land speed, and there's my rolling chassis. Once I had assembled it back into the nose of the car, I removed just a little slight piece right around where the front wheel was going to be because it looked a little too flat and square. I wanted to keep a little bit of shape to it to echo the shape of the chassis itself. I then turned my attention to the rear wheels of the car, and the original design of these land speed wheels, I didn't like the insides of them, so I found some insert wheels from an old Mack truck, trim those down to fit right inside, so they're going to be the inside of the wheels, and you can see the brake calipers are coming together there. I then turned my attention to the canopy. I wanted a single post canopy so that it would raise up. When I put it onto the body of the car, I realized it really didn't quite fit right. So I took a piece of acid-free mat board, trimmed out the shape of the canopy, and then glued that onto the body itself. So once that was adhered down, I then took my body filler again and started to smooth it and fill it all in so that I could keep that shape where the canopy would fit down inside. And here I'm more final detail on the body filler. While the body was drying and coming into shape, I turned my attention to the engine. And I have a 2000s era Lamborghini 12-cylinder engine, so that's it taken out of one of my other diecast cars. But I really love those air intakes, so somehow I've got to keep that design of that air intake, and I ended up having to chop the gearbox off to get it to fit in, take the exhausts off. And here's back to the chassis where I'm getting the 12-cylinder engine block to fit into the car itself. I then finished all the body work I wanted and started to primer it. So here it is in white primer now. And then moving on to the color, again, what other color would I use but yellow? So there's my two-tone yellow that's coming in here for the body components. Once I started to assemble that, I turned my attention to the cockpit itself, got the floor put in, the seat I was going to use, the pedals and the shifters. Moving on to the exhaust, I want to use the original exhaust from the Lamborghini and incorporate that into the chassis itself. When I got to the front of the car, well, here actually in this, you can see now the interior of the cockpit is completed. I've added the seat belt restraints. I wanted to use two small airfoil wings on the nose of the car, very similar to the Blue Flame, where it's going to help keep the nose of the car down at speed when it's on the salt flats. So I took two pieces of aircraft wing and cut them and shaped them to fit the nose of the body and put a stud in to support it. And then here's my finished chassis. I've added this, and for the rear end, I just put a very small rear stabilizer foil on the top just to help keep the car stable itself. I've added some trim from the original Auburn car onto the side. I've added the two nitrous oxide bottles, one on each side with the hoses. And then there's my finished car. Then I pulled out one of my Lamborghini diecast, 1/18th diecast, and there it is sitting comparison to the Lamborghini. And we now take the Auburghini out to the salt flats for some photo shots out in the sun. And we do a little 360 here. You can see how I fit the rear exhausts in, the lettering on the tires. I even put the little Auburn logo on the rear wheels. And a 360 of the car itself. Here's my little character Hot Rod coming out to check the car out. And there is the final design. And my Auburghini Land Speed, a combination of late Eras 20 with a new 12-cylinder 2000s engine. And the Auburghini now is finished. And thank you for watching my video.